After reading this module, you shall be able to gain an insight about microeconomics, understand the various concepts of microeconomic theory, including consumer choice, firms' objectives, their pricing strategies, and also identify the normative issues of welfare in microeconomic theory. We'll also be analyzing the various causes of market failure. Microeconomics is the branch of economics based on the economic behavior of small economic units like consumers, firms, workers, savers, individual industries, markets, and so on. All economic decisions are ultimately made by individuals, and totality of these decisions defines the economic environment. Consumers decide how much of various goods to purchase, workers decide what jobs to take, and firms decide how many workers to hire and how much output to produce. Now, microeconomics encompasses the factors that influence these choices and the way these small decisions merge to determine the working of the entire economy. Market analysis. Most of the microeconomic theory involves the study of how the individual markets function. Markets refer to the interplay of all potential buyers and sellers involved in production, sale, or purchase of a particular good or service. To analyze markets, we need to focus on what factors influence the decisions of buyers and sellers. Now, various factors could have an impact, but some are clearly more important than the others. Now, price receives special attention. Prices are the result of market transactions, but they also strongly influence the behavior of buyers and sellers in every market. The analysis of buyers relies on demand curves. Supply curves depicts the behavior of sellers. Demand curve. The amount of a good that any consumer wishes to purchase depends on various factors like price of the good, price of the related goods, age, income, taste, etc. Now, a demand curve focuses on the effect of changes in price with other factors held constant. Now, according to the law of demand, ceteris paribus, the lower the price of a good, the larger the quantity consumers wish to purchase. Now, the negative slope of the demand curve, higher prices associated with lower quantities, is the graphical representation of the law of demand as given in figure 3.1a. Now, when there is a change in income, prices of related goods, or the consumer preferences that affect the quantities demanded at each possible price, it causes a shift in the demand. For example, an increase in income may lead to a rightward shift in the demand curve as depicted in figure 3.1b. The supply curve. The amount the firm offers for sale also depends on various factors such as the price of the good, state of technology, cost, productivity of inputs which are required for production, etc. The supply curve shows the quantity of goods producers will be willing to sell at alternative prices. It generally slopes upwards as given in figure 3.2a, indicating that output will increase at a higher price. Now, a shift in the supply curve arises when the underlying factors influencing the supply like technology, prices of inputs change. Now, as shown in figure 3.2b, a technological change may cause the supply curve to shift to the right. Market equilibrium. Now, we have just seen that the demand curve shows what consumers wish to purchase at various prices, and the supply curve shows what producers wish to sell. Now, when the two are put together, there is only one price at which the quantity the consumers wish to purchase equals the quantity that firms wish to sell. The intersection identifies the equilibrium price and quantity in the market. A basic conclusion of microeconomic theory is that market forces left to themselves will tend to establish this equilibrium price and quantity. As illustrated in figure 3.3, we see that E is the equilibrium point at price P and quantity Q. The elasticity of demand. Now, what is elasticity of demand? Elasticity measures the sensitivity of one variable to another. The price elasticity of demand measures the percentage change in quantity demanded resulting from 1% increase in the price of that good. It is denoted by EP, which shows that percentage change in Q divided by percentage change in P. The percentage change in a variable is the absolute change in the variable divided by the original level of the variable. In other words, EP is equal to delta Q upon Q divided by delta P upon P. The price elasticity of demand is usually a negative number. Now, when the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded usually falls. Thus, delta Q upon delta P is negative, as is EP. When the price elasticity is greater than 1, demand is price elastic because the percentage decline in quantity demanded is greater than the percentage increase in the price. Now, if the price elasticity is less than 1 in magnitude, demand is said to be price inelastic. In general, the price elasticity of demand for a good depends on the availability of other goods that can be substituted for it. Now, when there are close substitutes, a price increase will cause the consumer to buy less of the good and more of the substitute. So, demand will then be highly price elastic. When there are no close substitutes, demand will tend to be price inelastic. Consumer behavior. The theory of consumer behavior explains the principles underlying the consumer demand. We study how consumers make consumption decisions and how their preferences and budget constraints determine their demand for various goods. Consumer preferences. The specific market baskets that consumers actually purchase depend on their preferences or taste. The theory of consumer behavior undertakes three basic assumptions about people's preferences for one market basket versus another. Now, these assumptions are A. Completeness, which says that preferences are assumed to be complete. That is, the consumers can compare and rank all possible baskets. Thus, for any two market baskets, say A and B, a consumer will prefer A to B, will prefer B to A, or will be indifferent between the two. Now, the second assumption is transitivity, which says that preferences are transitive, implying that if a consumer prefers basket A to basket B and basket B to basket C, then the consumer also prefers basket A to C. The third assumption is more is better than less. So, goods are assumed to be desirable. So, consumers always prefer more of one good to less. So, in addition, consumers are never satisfied or satiated. More is always better. These three assumptions form the basis of the consumer theory. They impose a degree of rationality and reasonableness on the consumer preferences. Now, the consumer preferences can be graphically illustrated through what are called indifference curves. An indifference curve represents all combinations of market baskets that provide a consumer with the same level of satisfaction, which is given in figure 4.1. It is downward sloping, convex to the origin, given the diminishing marginal rate of substitution between any two goods. A utility function measure that assigns a level of utility to individual market baskets can be represented by a set of indifference curves. Now, as we see in the figure 4.1, there are three indifference curves with different utility levels. So, U3 is greater than U2, which is greater than U1, and these indifference curves are associated with a particular utility function, budget constraint. So, we have focused on the first element of consumer theory, which is consumer preferences. Now, the second element, budget constraint, is what the consumers face as a result of their limited incomes. The budget line indicates all combination of goods for which the total amount of money is equal to income. Now, let's consider two goods X and Y. Now, given the consumer's income as M and prices of the two goods as Px and Py respectively, the budget line represents the following budget constraint, which is given as Pxx plus Pyy is equal to M. The budget line, as represented in figure 4.2, is a downward sloping straight line with a constant negative slope, which is equal to the price ratio, that is Px upon Py. The magnitude of the slope tells us the rate at which the two goods can be substituted for each other without changing the total amount of money spent. Consumers' choice of different goods can be determined. It is assumed that the consumers make this choice in a rational way. That is, they choose goods to maximize their satisfaction given the limited budget available to them. The maximizing market basket must satisfy two conditions. It must be located on the budget line and it must give the consumer the most preferred combination of goods and services. Now, as illustrated in figure 4.3, the consumers maximizes the satisfaction by choosing point E. This point is the consumer's equilibrium point. At this point, the budget line and the indifference curve U2 are tangent to each other and no higher level of satisfaction like point D can be attained. At E, the equilibrium point, the marginal rate of substitution between the two goods equals the price ratio. At C, however, because MRS is greater than the price ratio, satisfaction is not maximized. Thus, at the consumer's equilibrium, MRS is equal to Px upon Py. Objectives of the firm. The theory of the firm focuses on the supply side of the market. It examines the behavior of producers, how firms can produce efficiently, and how their cost of production change with change in both input prices and the level of output. Production function. The production function summarizes the characteristics of existing technology. It is a relationship between inputs and output. It identifies the maximum quantity of a commodity that can be produced per time period by each specific combination of inputs. It is denoted as Q is equal to FKL, where Q is the output, K is the units of capital, and L is the units of labor used in the production of Q. The production function is illustrated in figure 5.1. This curve shows a relationship between Q and L for given K. As labor increases, ceteris paribus output increases. The slope of this total product curve is the marginal product of labor. The marginal product of labor is defined as the change in output resulting from change in labor, keeping all other factors constant. Correspondingly, average product is the total output per unit of labor. So, thus we can say that MPL is equal to del Q upon del L and APL is equal to Q upon L. Now, as given in figure 5.1, average and marginal product increase at low levels of employment of labor. They reach a maximum and then decline. Also, when the marginal product is greater than the average product is increasing, and when marginal product is less than average product, the average product is decreasing. They both are equal when average product is at its maximum. The relationship between the total product curve and the marginal product is also important. Now, as long as marginal product is positive, total product will continue to rise and vice versa. So, when marginal product is 0, total product reaches its maximum. Now, the shape of these curves reflect what is called the law of variable proportions. The law states that as the amount of some input is increased in equal increments while technology and other inputs are held constant, the resulting increments in output will decrease beyond some point. Cost of production. Now, a firm's costs are determined by its production function. The law of variable proportion determines the way the variable cost varies with output. Now, figure 5.2a depicts the various short run cost curves, that is average total cost and marginal cost. The average and marginal cost are U-shaped. When the marginal cost is below average cost declines and vice versa. Now, when average cost is at a minimum, marginal cost is equal to average cost. The long run average cost curve is an envelope of short run cost curves as given in figure 5.2b. It is the lowest average cost attainable when all inputs are variable. It is also U-shaped curve depicting economies and diseconomies of scale. The minimum point of the long run average cost curve corresponds to the optimum level of output at which the capacity is fully utilized. Many firms produce more than one product which may be closely linked to one another. In such cases, a firm is likely to enjoy production or cost advantages. Two situations can arise: economies of scope and diseconomies of scope. Economies of scope are present when the joint output of a single firm is greater than the output that could be achieved by two different firms, each producing a single product. And in contrast, if a firm's joint output is less than that which could be achieved by separate firms, then its production process involves diseconomies of scope. Pricing and output decisions under different market structure. First important market structure is perfect competition. Now, in perfect competition, there are a very large number of firms in the industry and the product is homogeneous. Competition is perfect in the sense that every firm considers that it can sell any amount of output it wishes at the going market price, which cannot be affected by the individual producers whose share in the market is very small. Thus, although competition is perfect, there is no rivalry among the individual firms. Each firm decides its level of output, ignoring the others in the industry. The products of the firms are perfect substitutes for one another, so that the price elasticity of the demand curve of the individual firm is infinite. Entry is free and easy. Monopoly. In a monopoly situation, there is only one firm in the industry and there are no close substitutes for the product of the monopolist. The demand of the monopolist coincides with the industry demand, which has a finite price elasticity, and entry is blockaded. We also have what is called monopolistic competitive market structure. In such a market structure, there are very large number of firms, but the product is somewhat differentiated. Hence, the demand of the individual firm has a negative slope, but its price elasticity is high due to the existence of close substitutes produced by other firms in the industry. Now, despite the existence of close substitutes, each firm acts atomistically, ignoring the competitors' reactions because there are too many of them, and each one would be very little affected by the actions of any other competitor. Thus, each seller thinks that he would keep some of his customers if he raised his price, and he would increase his sales but not much if he lowered his price. So, his demand curve has a high price elasticity but is not perfectly elastic because of the attachment of customers to the slightly differentiated product he offers. Entry is free and easy in such an industry. Oligopoly. Now, oligopoly is an industry structure characterized by a few large firms producing most or all of the output of some product. Examples include automobiles, steel, electrical equipment industries, etc. Now, the characteristic of oligopoly that distinguishes it from the other market structures is the mutual interdependence of firms in the industry. Because there are only a few firms, each realizes its actions will affect its rivals. Therefore, any price or output decision a firm makes must be made with the thought of its rivals in mind and with some sort of guess about how rivals will respond. Since firms can never be sure how rivals will react, they will make decisions in the presence of uncertainty. The nature of an oligopolistic market makes it impossible for economists to develop a single model that is applicable to all industries exhibiting oligopolistic characteristics. Instead, economists have developed several theories of oligopoly, each with different behavioral assumptions about how an oligopolist believes its rivals will react and how they actually do react. The implication of these models also vary since the assumptions made about rival behavior differ. And when assumptions vary, more outcomes become possible. So, oligopoly models have been broadly differentiated as non-collusive models of Cournot, Bertrand, Stackelberg, Chamberlain, Sweezy, collusive models like cartels, price leadership, etc. Now, non-collusive oligopoly is a market where firms work independently and strategically by recognizing the mutual interdependence. Whereas collusive oligopoly is one where firms maximize their joint profits by entering into a collusive agreement to restrict competition and to avoid uncertainties arising from oligopolistic interdependence. Bilateral monopoly. Now, bilateral monopoly is a market consisting of a single seller, that is monopolist, and a single buyer, which is monopsonist. For example, if a single firm produced all the copper in a country and if only one firm used this metal, the copper market would be a bilateral monopoly market. The equilibrium in such a market cannot be determined by the traditional tools of demand and supply. Economic analysis can only define the range within which the price will eventually be settled. So, the precise level of the price and output, however, will ultimately be defined by non-economic factors such as the bargaining power, skill and other strategies of the participant firms. Under conditions of bilateral monopoly, economic analysis leads to indeterminacy, which is finally resolved by exogenous factors. Pricing strategy. Now, price theory pertains to the determination of prices of goods and services by firms. It is based not only on the cost of product but also on profit margin and a holistic view of the market and future viability. A range of pricing strategy can be employed by a business firm when selling a good or service. These include marginal cost pricing, markup pricing, price discrimination, factor pricing and peak load pricing. Now, what is marginal cost pricing? Now, marginal cost pricing is a pricing technique in which the price of a product is set equal to its marginal cost. That is the extra cost of producing an extra unit of output. By this policy, a producer charges for each product unit sold only the addition to total cost resulting from materials and direct labor. Market pricing is also another pricing method, which is a strategy the firm uses to maximize profits. In this method, the firm estimates the average cost of production and then adds a predetermined percentage markup or profit margin. Now, price discrimination is a pricing technique which is unique to monopoly market structure. Here, the firms charges different prices to different groups of buyers for identical or similar goods or services. It exists when a firm has market power and can prevent or limit arbitrage, and when consumers differ in their demands for a given good or service. Factor pricing theory is concerned with the evaluation of the services of the factors of production. It deals with the determination of the prices of 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital and entrepreneur. Peak load pricing. It is a method of pricing in which at the time of peak demand prices rise to balance demand and supply. Such a pricing strategy is an attempt to shift demand to accommodate supply. Pricing higher when demand is at its peak will balance out the supply and demand so that there is no shortage on either end. Welfare economics and market failure. Now, microeconomic theory also deals with normative issues, which is studied as a separate branch, that is welfare economics. Now, welfare economics deals with the way various economic arrangements affect the welfare or well-being of all the members of the society. There are 2 fundamental theories of welfare economics. The first welfare theorem states that the equilibrium in a set of competitive markets is Pareto efficient. According to the second theorem of welfare economics, as long as preferences are convex, then every Pareto efficient allocation can be supported as a competitive equilibrium. Now, economists often use social welfare functions of one kind or another to represent distributional judgments about allocations. Now, as long as the social welfare function is increasing in each individual's utility, a welfare maximum will be Pareto efficient. Furthermore, every Pareto efficient allocation can be thought of as maximizing some social welfare function. Market failure. Now, in some situations, even competitive markets are not capable of producing efficient outcomes. There may exist another plausible outcome where a person in the market can be made better off without making someone worse off. Such a situation is described as market failure. Market failure arises when freely functioning markets are unable to provide an efficient allocation of resources. This is because there is a divergence between private benefits and social benefits that arises from carrying out a particular activity. Some important causes of market failure are the presence of externalities, public goods and imperfect information. Now externalities. Now what are externalities? Externalities are the harmful or beneficial effects of activities that are borne by people who are not directly involved in market exchanges. If externalities are present, the outcome of a competitive market is unlikely to be Pareto efficient. However, government intervention and the legal system can ensure that property rights are well defined so that efficiency enhancing trades can be made. If preferences are quasi-linear, the efficient amount of consumption externality will be independent of the assignment of property rights. Cures for production externalities include the use of Pigovian taxes, setting up a market for the externality, or allowing firms to merge. Public goods. Now what are these goods? Public goods are the goods which are non-rival and non-excludable in nature. They are goods for which everyone must consume the same amount, such as national defense, air pollution, etc. The free rider problem is associated with these types of goods, which refers to the temptation of individuals to let others provide the public goods. So in general, purely individualistic mechanisms will not generate the optimal amount of a public good because of this free rider problem. Various collective decision methods have been proposed to determine the supply of a public good. Now such methods include the command mechanism, voting, and Vickrey-Clark Group's auction mechanism. Symmetric information. Now markets fail to perform when there is asymmetric information, which is a situation where one side in a transaction has more information than the other side. It can arise from a hidden action, an action that one side can take but cannot be observed by the other side. Now in case of hidden actions, it is likely that the more informed side will indulge in wrong actions, leading to the problem of moral hazard. In the presence of moral hazard, the more informed side or the insured person tends to undertake low levels of preventive care, leading to inefficiency in pricing. Now, to cope up with the problem of moral hazard, insurance companies carry out different practices in the form of co-insurance and deductible. This helps in reducing the intensity of moral hazard. Now, the asymmetry in information can also arise from hidden characteristics, wherein one party knows some characteristics which the other party would like to know but does not know. Hidden characteristics lead to situations where the type of agents is not observable, so that one side of a market has to guess the type or the quality of a product based on the behavior of the other side of the market. This leads to the problem of adverse selection. In markets involving adverse selection, too little trade may take place. A buyer of a car gets to trade with sellers of bad cars only. A health insurance company gets to trade with only unwell people. In such situations, the informed party looks for indicators of hidden characteristics called signals and often uses a screening device to differentiate customers according to their willingness to pay. Now let us summarize whatever has been covered in this module. Now, microeconomics is a branch of economics that studies the behavior of individuals and small economic units in making decisions on the allocation of limited resources. It involves the study of how individual markets function. Markets refer to the interplay of all potential buyers and sellers involved in production, sale, or purchase of a particular good or service. Microeconomic theory examines how these decisions and behavior affect the supply and demand for goods and services, which determine prices, and how prices in turn determine the quantity supplied and quantity demanded of goods and services. The theory of consumer behavior explains the principles underlying the consumer demand. It examines how consumers make consumption decisions and how their preferences and budget constraints determine their demand for various goods. The theory of the firm focuses on the supply side of the market. It studies the behavior of the producers, how firms can produce efficiently, and how their cost of production change with changes in both input prices and the level of output. A range of pricing strategies are also employed by a business firm when selling a good or service. These include marginal cost pricing, markup pricing, peak load pricing, price discrimination, and factor pricing. Now, microeconomic theory also deals with normative issues, which is studied as a separate branch, that is welfare economics. It deals with the way various economic arrangements affect the welfare or well-being of all members of the society. In some situations, even competitive markets are not capable of producing efficient outcomes. Such a situation is described as market failure, which may be caused due to the presence of externalities, public goods, and imperfect information.